Mom, you being here makes things uncomfortable. That was the sentence my daughter chose, standing in her own living room, arms folded like she was explaining something obvious to a stranger instead of speaking to the woman who had raised her. I remember the way the late afternoon light came through her oversized windows, reflecting off the marble kitchen island I had helped pay for, the one she once insisted I had to see because it finally makes the house feel complete. I stood there holding a small container of homemade soup, still warm in my hands, something I had been bringing her since she caught a cold 2 days earlier, something I had done without thinking, the way I always had for the last 45 years. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, trying to understand how we had arrived at a sentence like that, how something so simple, so final, could come out of her mouth with that calm, measured tone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound angry. If anything, she sounded relieved. We just need space, she added, glancing briefly toward the hallway where her husband was on a call, as if making sure he wasn't listening too closely. You're too involved, Mom. It's a lot. A lot. I nodded slowly, like I was processing a piece of information that required careful consideration, even though the truth landed instantly, heavy and unmistakable. I had become something excessive. Something unnecessary. I set the container down on the counter without a word, noticing how my hands didn't shake the way I expected them to. I had always imagined a moment like this would break me, that I would say something, defend myself, remind her of everything, of the nights I worked double shifts, of the tuition checks, of the down payment I wired without hesitation, of the years I spent making sure she never felt alone. But none of those words came. Instead, I heard myself say, very quietly, okay. She exhaled, almost like she had been waiting for that exact response, like I had just made something easier for her. Thank you, she said, already turning slightly away, already done with the conversation. I picked up my purse, walked to the door, and let myself out without looking back. I didn't cry in the driveway. I didn't sit in my car trying to collect myself. I just drove home in silence. The kind that doesn't feel empty but full of something shifting into place. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, the sun had started to set, casting long shadows across the front of the house I had lived in for over 30 years. I walked inside, set my keys down in the same bowl I had used for decades, and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet. Then I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I walked to the back of the house, opened a drawer I rarely touched, and took out a folder I had kept closed for years. Because if there was one thing my daughter didn't understand when she said I wasn't needed, it was how much of their life still depended on me being there. And by the end of that week, they were going to find out exactly what it meant when I wasn't. I did not open the folder right away. I placed it on the kitchen table. The same table where I had sat for years balancing bills, signing checks, and making decisions that shaped my daughter's life long before she ever realized it. The house was quiet, but not in a lonely way. It was steady. Familiar. I took off my coat, hung it in the closet, and walked back to the table like I had all the time in the world. Because now I did. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and rested my hand on top of the folder without opening it. I wanted to be sure. Not about what I was about to do, but about why. There is a difference. Anyone can act out of hurt. Anyone can react when they feel dismissed. But what I was about to do required something else entirely. Clarity. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the past come back, not in pieces, but all at once. The nights I stayed up sewing her school costumes because we could not afford to buy them. The mornings I woke up at 5 o'clock to make sure she had a hot breakfast before school. The afternoons I spent helping her with homework after working. 8 hours on my feet. I did not remember those things with bitterness. I remembered them as facts. As investments. And like any investment, they had built something over time. Something real. Something measurable. That was the part she did not see when she told me I was not needed. She saw the present. I understood the foundation. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents I had not touched in years. The original deed to the house she was living in. My name, printed clearly at the top. The trust paperwork I had set up after her father passed, something I had done on the advice of a very careful attorney who told me, you can always decide later how you want things to be divided. I had smiled at the time, thinking there would never be a reason to change anything. I had already decided. Everything would go to her. It had always been that simple. Until it was not. I flipped through the pages one by one, not rushing, not hesitating. Every signature was mine. Every decision had been mine. I traced my finger along the lines where I had signed years ago, remembering exactly how certain I had felt in those moments. That certainty had not disappeared. It had changed direction. I reached for my phone and scrolled to a number I had not called in a long time. David Harper. My attorney. He had handled everything after my husband died, and he had always been precise, calm, and very clear about one thing. You are in control of your assets as long as you choose to be. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Margaret, it has been a while. His voice had not changed. It has, I said. I need to schedule an appointment. There was a brief pause, not hesitation, just attention. Is everything all right? He asked. I looked down at the documents spread across my table, then out the window at the quiet street I had lived on for decades. Everything is clear, I said. I just need to make some changes. And for the first time that day, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a quiet, steady decision forming into something real. I met David 3 days later in his office on Broad Street, the same building I had walked into almost 10 years ago after my husband passed, when everything felt uncertain and overwhelming, and I needed someone to help me put structure around a life that had suddenly changed. Back then, I had sat in the same leather chair, hands trembling, asking questions about probate and taxes, and what would happen to everything we had built. I remembered how patient he had been, how he explained each document like it mattered, because to him it did. This time, my hands were steady. I placed the folder on his desk before he even asked, sliding it toward him in a quiet, deliberate motion. He opened it carefully, scanning the first page, then the next, his expression shifting from routine professionalism to focused attention. You have kept everything in excellent order, he said, almost as an observation to himself. Most people do not. I nodded once. I always planned to leave it that way, I replied. He looked up at me then, really looked, the way someone does when they sense there is more behind a request than what is being said out loud. What would you like to change? He asked. I did not rush the answer. I had spent 3 nights thinking about it, not emotionally, not reactively, but carefully, the way I had approached every major decision in my life. Everything that currently transfers directly to my daughter, I said, my voice even, needs to be reconsidered. He did not interrupt. He did not question my reasoning. He simply reached for a notepad and began writing. All right, he said. Let us go step by step. We went through it line by line. The house she was living in, still legally mine, something she had never needed to think about because I had never given her a reason to. The joint account I had added her to years ago, back when it seemed practical, when trust was not something that needed to be measured. The trust itself, structured in a way that would have transferred everything to her without complication, without delay, without conditions. Each item, one by one, was placed back into my control. Do you want to remove her entirely? David asked at one point, his pen hovering above the page. It was a simple question, but it carried weight. I thought about it. For exactly as long as it deserved. No, I said. I wanted to be clear that this is intentional. He nodded, understanding immediately. Then we will adjust the allocations, he replied. You can designate new beneficiaries, or restructure through a different trust. I leaned back slightly in the chair, looking at the documents spread across his desk, seeing them not as papers, but as decisions I had already made years ago, just now being rewritten. I want control, I said. And I want time. He gave a small, approving nod. That can be arranged. Over the next hour, we outlined everything. New terms. New conditions. Safeguards that would ensure nothing moved without my direct approval. By the time we finished, the structure of my entire estate had shifted, not dramatically on the surface, but completely underneath. When I stood to leave, David closed the folder and slid it back toward me. Once these documents are executed, he said, everything changes immediately. I picked up the folder, holding it with the same calm I had felt when I first walked in. That is the point, I replied. And as I stepped out onto the street, the city moving around me like it always had, I realized something simple and undeniable. For the first time in a very long time, nothing in my life depended on being wanted. Everything depended on what I chose to do next. The documents were finalized 2 days later, and I signed them in the same office with the same steady hand I had carried with me since that afternoon in my kitchen. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts, just a quiet awareness that something permanent had shifted. David handed me a copy of everything, neatly organized, each page marked and dated, every signature witnessed and recorded. "You are fully protected now," he said, closing his briefcase with a soft click. I nodded once, not because I needed reassurance, but because I understood exactly what that meant. Protection did not feel dramatic. It felt quiet, controlled, intentional. I drove home afterward, taking my time, stopping at a light longer than I needed to, watching people move through their routines without thinking twice about the structures holding their lives together. Most people never notice those structures until something forces them to. I had noticed mine. And I had rebuilt it. When I walked into my house, the air felt the same, but I did not. I placed the folder back into the drawer, closing it gently, knowing I would not need to look at it again anytime soon. Everything was already in motion. That evening, my phone rang for the first time since I had left my daughter's house. Her name appeared on the screen, bright and familiar, exactly where it had always been. I let it ring, not out of spite. Not to prove a point. I simply did not feel the need to answer. A voicemail followed. Her voice was lighter than I expected, almost casual. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Call me when you can." I set the phone down without listening to it again. A few hours later, another call. Then a text message. "Did you get my message?" I read it once, then locked the screen. The next morning, there were 3 more messages. The tone had shifted slightly. Still polite, but with an edge of confusion underneath. By the afternoon, that confusion turned into urgency. "Mom, the bank said something about the account. Can you call me?" I did not respond. I was sitting at my kitchen table again, the same place where this had all started, sipping my coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch without interruption. It was not uncomfortable. It was clear. For years, I had answered every call, returned every message, made myself available without question, without pause. Now, for the first time, I was choosing not to. And that choice changed everything. Another message came in, this one from Jason. Short. Direct. "Margaret, we need to talk. There is an issue with the house paperwork." I read it carefully, noticing the shift from familiarity to formality, from comfort to concern. I placed the phone face down on the table and finished my coffee. They were starting to see it now, not the conversation from a few days ago, not the words that had been said, but the structure beneath their lives, the part they had never needed to question before. The part that had always been handled quietly, consistently, without recognition. By the end of that day, the calls had stopped sounding casual. They sounded different. And I had not said a single word. By the next morning, the silence had shifted into something else entirely. It was no longer just unanswered calls. It was pressure building on the other side. My phone lit up before I even finished pouring my coffee. Emily again. This time she did not leave a voicemail. She called twice in a row, then sent a message almost immediately after. "Mom, something is wrong. The bank says I cannot access the account." I read the words slowly, not because they were complicated, but because I wanted to be precise in how I understood them. Not access. Not delayed. Not a mistake. I set the phone down and continued with my morning the way I always had, opening the blinds, letting in the light, moving through my kitchen with a rhythm that had not changed in decades. A few minutes later, another message came through. "Jason is saying there is an issue with the house paperwork too. We need to figure this out." Need. The word stood out to me in a way it never had before. I did not respond. Instead, I walked into the living room and sat down in the chair by the window, the one my husband used to sit in every evening, the one that had become mine after he was gone. From there, I could see the street, the steady flow of cars, people moving without urgency, without disruption. It grounded me. Another call. This time Jason. I let it ring until it stopped. Then a message. Margaret, the title company says there are restrictions now. We cannot move forward with anything. Can you call me back? His tone had changed completely. There was no familiarity left in it. No assumption. Just confusion trying to hold itself together. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to listen to the quiet inside my own head. For years, every problem they had encountered eventually came back to me. Not always directly. Not always immediately. But I was the one who resolved things. Quietly. Consistently. Without needing recognition. That had been my role. That had been my place. And they had told me I was not needed. The thought did not hurt anymore. It clarified everything. My phone vibrated again, this time with a longer message from Emily. Mom, please. I do not understand what is happening. They're saying your name is the only one on some of the documents. I thought everything was already transferred. Why did they not tell us this before? I read that message twice. Not because I was confused, but because I recognized something in her words that had not been there before. Uncertainty. Not about me. About her own understanding of the life she was living. I placed the phone on the table beside me and stood up slowly, walking back into the kitchen, pouring myself another cup of coffee even though I did not really need it. The routine mattered. The steadiness mattered. Because everything on their side was starting to unravel, not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, precise ways that could not be ignored. By midday, the messages became more direct. Mom, we need to talk today. Then, please answer. This is serious. I looked at the screen, then set it face down again. For the first time in a very long time, I was not the one reacting to urgency. I was the one who had created the conditions for it. And I still had not said a single word. By late afternoon, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The calls came in waves now, not spaced out, not polite, but clustered together like something was pressing in on them from all sides. Emily called 3 times within 10 minutes, then sent a message that did not try to sound calm anymore. Mom, please stop ignoring us. This is getting serious. I read it while standing at the kitchen counter, the same place I had stood countless mornings before, making breakfast, packing lunches, preparing for a life that used to revolve entirely around her needs. I set the phone down without responding and turned on the faucet, rinsing out a cup that was already clean. The small, ordinary movements kept everything grounded. They always had. Another message came in, this one longer, more direct. The mortgage company says the account linked for payments is no longer accessible. They told us to contact you. What is going on? I dried my hands slowly and walked back into the living room, sitting down again in that same chair by the window. Outside, nothing had changed. Cars passed. A neighbor walked their dog. The world continued unaffected. Inside my house, everything was steady. On their side, it was not. I could feel that without hearing a single word. Jason called again. This time he left a voicemail, his voice tighter than before, trying to stay controlled, but failing just enough to reveal what was underneath. Margaret, we need to resolve this today. There are payments due, and we cannot move anything forward without your authorization. Please call me back as soon as you get this. Authorization. Another word that had always existed quietly in the background, never questioned. Never challenged. Until now. I leaned back and let the silence stretch again, not avoiding the moment, but allowing it to unfold exactly as it needed to. For years, every structure in their lives had been supported by decisions I made without discussion. I had built it that way because it felt right. Because I believed in stability. Because I believed in family. And now, for the first time, they were seeing what that structure actually looked like when it was no longer automatic. My phone vibrated again, and I picked it up, not to respond, but to read. Emily again. Mom, if this is about what I said the other day, we can talk about it. You did not need to take things this far. I stared at that message longer than the others. Not because it changed anything, but because it revealed something important. She still believed this was about a conversation. About feelings. About something that could be adjusted with the right words. She had not understood yet. I placed the phone back down and stood up, walking toward the hallway, stopping briefly in front of the drawer where the folder was kept. I did not open it. I did not need to. Everything in that drawer had already been set in motion. By evening, the messages stopped asking and started demanding. We need access to the account immediately. This is affecting our finances. You cannot just shut things down like this. I read each one without reacting, noticing the shift in language, the shift in tone, the shift in expectation. For the first time, they were speaking to me without assuming I would fix it. And for the first time, I was not going to. Because this was never about shutting anything down. It was about something much simpler. They had said I was not needed. And I had finally decided to believe them. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, not because I was restless, but because something inside me had already settled. The kind of clarity that does not need to be revisited. I made my coffee the same way I always had, measured, quiet, deliberate, and sat down at the kitchen table without turning on the television or checking my phone. For a while, I let the silence stay exactly where it was. Then, slowly, I reached for my phone and turned it over. There were 14 missed calls. 9 messages. All from them. I did not feel overwhelmed looking at it. I felt distant. Not disconnected, just no longer pulled in the way I used to be. I opened the most recent message from Emily. Mom, we're coming over. We need to talk face to face. This cannot wait. I read it once, then set the phone down again. I did not respond. If they were coming, they would come. I finished my coffee, washed the cup, and moved through my morning like any other day. Around 10:30, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I did not rush to the door. I did not look out the window. I simply stood where I was, in the kitchen, hands resting lightly on the counter, listening to the sound of footsteps approaching the front door. The knock came quickly. Firm. Not tentative. I walked to the door and opened it without hesitation. Emily stood there, her expression tight, her usual composure replaced with something sharper. Jason stood slightly behind her, holding his phone, his posture tense, controlled but clearly strained. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Emily stepped forward. Mom, what is going on? She asked, her voice no longer soft, no longer distant, but edged with urgency. I stepped aside, allowing them in without a word. They walked into the living room, both looking around like something in the house might have changed. Nothing had. I closed the door behind them and followed, taking my seat in the chair by the window. I did not offer them anything. Not coffee. Not water. Just space. Emily remained standing. We went to the bank this morning, she said, her words coming faster now. They said the account has been restructured. That I am no longer authorized. And the mortgage payment did not go through. They told us everything has to be approved by you now. She paused, searching my face for something. An explanation. A reaction. Jason stepped in then, his tone more measured but no less direct. Margaret, this is affecting our financial stability. We have obligations. We need access restored immediately. I listened to both of them without interrupting, without shifting in my seat, without raising my voice. When they finished, the room fell quiet again, but this time it was not the same kind of silence as before. This one carried weight. Expectation. I folded my hands in my lap and looked at them, really looked, the way I had not in a long time. Not as my daughter and her husband, but as two adults standing in front of the consequences of something they had never needed to understand before. You said something to me a few days ago, I began, my voice even, steady, without emotion rising to the surface. Emily blinked, caught slightly off guard. That is not what this is about, she said quickly. I did not respond to that. I simply continued. You said I was not needed. The words settled into the room, not loud, not dramatic, but clear. Jason shifted slightly, glancing at Emily, then back at me. That was not meant the way you were taking it, he said. I nodded once. I understand exactly how it was meant, I replied. And for the first time since they had walked in, neither of them had an immediate response. Emily's expression shifted first, not dramatically, but enough that I could see the tension behind her composure starting to crack. Mom, you are taking this too far, she said, her voice tighter now, less controlled. We said we needed space. That is not the same as this. She gestured vaguely, as if the situation around her could be explained without naming it. I remained still, my hands folded, my posture unchanged. You are right, I said calmly. It is not the same. Jason stepped forward slightly, his tone lowering as if trying to bring the conversation back under control. Margaret, we understand that feelings were hurt, he said, choosing each word carefully, but this is not how families handle things. There are financial responsibilities involved. We need access to the accounts. The mortgage needs to be paid. This is not just about emotions. I looked at him, not with frustration, not with anger, but with clarity. You are correct, I said. This is not about emotions. Emily exhaled sharply, as if relieved to hear that, stepping closer. Then let us fix it, she said quickly. Just call the bank, restore everything, and we can move forward. We can talk about boundaries later. Boundaries. The word landed in the room with a different weight than she intended. I let a brief silence sit between us before speaking again. Everything has already been fixed, I said. Her brows furrowed. What does that mean? I did not raise my voice. I did not shift in my seat. It means the accounts are no longer structured the way they were, I replied. It means access now requires my authorization. It means the house you are living in is still legally mine, and any financial obligations connected to it will be handled according to the terms I have set. The words were simple, direct. There was no emotion attached to them, no emphasis needed. Emily stared at me, the meaning settling in piece by piece. You changed everything, she asked, her voice quieter now, almost disbelieving. I nodded once. Yes. Jason let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair, the first visible sign that his control was slipping. You cannot just do that without telling us, he said, his voice sharper now. I met his gaze without hesitation. I did not need to tell you, I replied. That is what ownership means. The room went still again, but this time the silence felt heavier, more final. Emily took a step back, shaking her head slightly. This is not fair, she said. We built our lives assuming things were stable. I watched her carefully, not interrupting, not correcting. When she finished, I spoke again, just as calmly as before. You built your lives assuming I would always be there to support that stability, I said. That was your assumption, not my obligation. Her eyes widened slightly, the words landing harder than anything I had said before. So what now? She asked, her voice no longer demanding, no longer confident, but searching. I held her gaze, steady and clear. Now, I said, everything moves through me. I let the sentence settle fully before continuing. If you need access, you ask. If there are payments, I decide how they are handled. If there are changes, they happen on my terms. Jason looked at Emily, then back at me, as if trying to find a way to shift the conversation back into something familiar, something manageable. But there was nothing left to adjust. No room to negotiate the structure itself. Because that structure had already been rewritten. And for the first time, they were standing in front of it without control. Emily did not speak right away after that. She stood there, her arms no longer crossed, her posture no longer guarded, but uncertain in a way I had not seen since she was a child trying to understand something she could not control. Jason shifted beside her, his jaw tightening slightly, but he did not interrupt. The room held that silence for a moment longer, not tense, not explosive, just clear. So you're just going to control everything now? Emily finally asked, her voice quieter, not confrontational, but searching for something she could still hold on to. I did not move. I did not soften my tone. No, I said. I am going to take responsibility for what has always been mine. She blinked, processing that, the difference between those two ideas settling slowly into place. And where does that leave us? She asked. I held her gaze, steady and direct. That depends on how you choose to move forward, I replied. Not on what I give you automatically. Jason let out a slow breath, looking between us, then finally spoke again. Margaret, we did not mean to make you feel unwanted, he said, his voice more controlled now, but still carrying the weight of what had already been said. I listened to him without reacting, then turned my Attention back to Emily. You did not make me feel anything, I said. You told me something. And I chose to believe you. The words landed differently this time. Not as a correction. As a conclusion. Emily's eyes shifted slightly, the confidence she had walked in with replaced by something quieter, something more reflective. That is not what I meant, she said, softer now. I nodded once. I understand, I replied. But meaning does not change impact. The room went still again, but it was not the same stillness as before. This one was not waiting for something to happen. It was acknowledging that something already had. I stood up slowly, not abruptly, not to end the conversation, but because there was nothing left to clarify. You will have access to what you need, I said, my voice even measured. But it will not come from assumption anymore. It will come from communication. From respect. From understanding what those things actually require. I walked past them toward the front door, opening it without looking back. Not as a dismissal. As a boundary. Emily did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She stood there for a moment, then picked up her purse quietly. Jason followed her, his expression no longer defensive, but thoughtful in a way it had not been when they arrived. As they stepped out, Emily paused briefly in the doorway. Mom, she began, but stopped, as if the word itself no longer carried the same certainty it once had. I did not respond immediately. I simply met her eyes, calm and steady. She nodded once, then turned and walked to the car without finishing the sentence. I closed the door gently behind them and stood there for a moment, my hand resting lightly on the handle. The house was quiet again. Not empty. Not lonely. Just clear. I walked back into the living room, sat down in the chair by the window, and looked out at the same street, the same steady movement of everything continuing as it always had. Nothing dramatic had happened. No voices raised. No doors slammed. Just something simple and final. I had not taken anything from them. I had only stopped giving it without being asked. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough.